Okay, so now we have our form, and if you remember, we changed the password, and then we resubmitted the form. So let's see what happens when we submit it. I'm going to scroll back down to the bottom. Again, we're going to check to see what the action is. Now remember, our action this time is going to be edit user because we had a UID. So we scroll down to the bottom and we check out this switch statement again based on what the action is. We're going to go to the edit user item here. Now it's the same as add user, and we run the admin users add edit form process, and that returns the content that we're going to display. We pass it two variables, one which is the set of post values, and the second, which is the action. So let's go ahead and see how we use those parameters within the function. I'm going to scroll up, not too far. It's right here on line 114. Now this time around, we're passing values to this function in order to allow us to reuse this function for something that's not necessarily a form submission. If we want some other script to be able to adjust the values of a record, we can do that through this function without a form. The first thing that this function does is validate the inputs. So we run admin users add edit form validate. If we scroll up, we can see what this is here. The validation has been split up into three sections, just like it was in our previous CRUD script. We have required, which is values that need to exist inside of an input. Alphanumeric validation, which means that the characters can only be A to Z and 0 through 9, no odd characters like periods or spaces. And then we need to check the uniqueness of the username. Now this one has changed just a bit because the usernames can actually change. So the difference is that when a user submits a form where they are not modifying their own username, it will look like they're using a username that already exists in the database when we check the database, because that record already exists. So what we need to do is modify our query a bit so that we check the uniqueness of the username as long as the username doesn't belong to the user that we're currently editing. And here's how we do that. We run MySQL query, and we're just selecting one of the columns to make this a quicker and simpler query from users, where username equals, and then we're concatenating in the username, and we're running it through MySQL real escape string, and the UID doesn't equal the UID that's currently being edited. So again, the goal of this is to make sure that the user can leave the same username in there and have it not trigger the duplicate username validation error. If the username exists and it doesn't belong to the user that's being edited, it will say, sorry, it looks like that username is already in use. And notice we're compiling these errors and we'll return the errors. Now, if we go back to the process function, you'll see here that we've compiled all of our errors. If the number of errors is greater than 0, then we're going to pass a string to notice, and we're using a function called arrayToList. Now, we haven't used that yet in our CMS example, but we've added it in this last step. So if we go to our functions.php file, I'm going to go back to the sites directory here, and in the includes folder, open up the functions.php file, and I'm going to scroll down, and you'll see here at the bottom we've added the arrayToList function, which will just take an array and turn it into an unordered list. Now back to adminusers.php. So the way we submitted the form, we didn't hit any errors, so we're going to skip all this and begin running this. So first of all, I'm going to scroll down just a little bit more. We clean up each of the inputs. Now this is something we did before in our previous example as well, but we're changing the name of the inputs to clean values, which is a little bit more clear than the variable name inputs that we used earlier. We check to see if we're adding, and we do that by checking for the existence of the UID key in the clean values variable. Now because we might want to use these clean variables later, what we do is duplicate the variable by assigning it to a different variable called addValues, and then we unset the UID. Because as we update the entry in the database, we don't want to update the UID. While it will be the same, it's a bit messy to update an auto-incrementing number inside of our database. Then what we do is pull all of these values together by imploding them with a comma and single quotes, and then adding the missing quotes around those, and then plugging that into an insert statement here. So we have insert into users, username, password, and then the values will be username, comma, password, the values that we submitted in the form, and that got cleaned up here. So this is our final SQL statement. And now we skip this part right here because we've already run something in this if chain. And then we pass the SQL statement into the MySQL function. we show the SQL statement to the user by using the notice function. And then if there's a result, that is, there was a positive return from the SQL query, then what we'll do is say either the user was added or the user was updated, and we'll do that by checking to see if the UID exists in our input values again. So now that that function is run, we can go back to our code here. And because this process doesn't return any content, this content is empty. So when we hop out of this switch statement and we check to see if the content is empty, it is. So we pull in our list of users using the admin users list function. We already talked through the important parts of what changed in this script when we add a user. So I'm going to go ahead and skip that, and we'll move on to the next step.